together in this pandemic and been in this particular format. And I think, all of us have been asked to do some pivoting along the way. And I wanted to explore what that pivot might look like if you apply it to kind of what we've learned during this year together, having to pivot to these kind of formats, these kind of conversations as the core way in which we engage each other spiritually over this last year. And to maybe think about taking a stab at reframing the way in which we think about our personal faith tradition and our collective faith tradition in a way that would be able to retain some of the lessons learned in this pivot for the future. So that's where I'm going to take you today. I know it's a bit like technical and maybe not inspirational, but I think it's important work to be doing, particularly coming out of Easter Sunday and the idea of the grave, opening, the stone being rolled back, and this invitation to journey into the capacity of another day, a new tomorrow. Well, let's do that with some intentionality and vigor coming out of this pandemic, as more and more of us, I believe, are kind of waking up to, oh my goodness, I'm not going to be able to spend my day in my pajamas on Zoom calls. I'm going to have to actually live again. So what might that look like? So welcome. I'm glad you're here. Make sure you shout out to each other and connect to each other this morning with using emoticons or whatever. And then at some point today, I'm going to ask all of you, particularly while Martin shares his music, to kind of reflect on coming up with a term or a phrase or a few words that you would use to identify your own spiritual / religious identity outside of the box. So that'll be the journey that we share today. Before we get started, I also want to just thank you for being a part of this conversation. I've been doing this now for a year, and today, and that's why the shirt, marks the day in which I end my time with you and start my sabbatical. I'll be gone for the next 3 months. I'll be back in August. And while I'm gone, I'm excited to have Janet Qatari, who will come and take over this time slot to be with you at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning. But for me, I get a break from it. So I'm, in a sense, like the butterflies on my shirt, one of my favorite shirts. I get to be set free a bit. And I'm going to spend time in this 3 months, this sabbatical time, kind of strategizing about how will I, as a faith leader, kind of come back into our time together in August, September, and provide some guidance and leadership on leveraging the ways in which we have pivoted and changed in this year. So it's going to give me some time to work on that, to do some of my own personal reflection on that, and then to even think about kind of programming models going forward that might be more appropriate as we begin to reemerge from this space. So I am grateful that all of you who are either on right now or log on during the week simply carved out some time in your week to be present in this digital format, in this kind of virtual conversation that we're having that helps us frame and unpack both the experience we're having from a spiritual, sacred vantage point, but also to hear through the various comments that you share, kind of the conversation that is happening inside of you or with those who are within your circles, and giving expression and language to that. All of it, I think, has given shape to kind of who we are and where we're going in this adventure. And I appreciate that you've been able to take that journey with us. I also appreciate appreciation of the kind of the ongoing financial support of this little community that hosts these, Our Savior's Lutheran Church. Obviously you can donate through the donate button on the Facebook page, but many of you have been ongoing supporters of the cause, despite sitting on your sofa, right? So thanks for that as well. And then lastly, before I start telling you about the research that the Pew Research Center has been doing for the last 15 years, which I think sets the tone for today, I wanted to talk about my Easter lily pivot. I was struck that traditionally every year on Easter, you purchase Easter lilies, and collectively we push them up in the front of the sanctuary where the faithful gather for Easter morning. And the sanctuary is filled with flowers and Easter lilies. And how different this year was when last Sunday, Easter Sunday, a lovely parishioner, a person who is a part of our little conversations that we have on Sunday morning and came to our drive-in service last week, handed me these beautiful lilies. And so rather than, collectively having those lilies in the collective space, I was carrying my lilies around, these lilies, around at the end of the service, having conversations, socially distanced conversations with people, holding my Easter lilies, right? And then I carried those Easter lilies, I carried them home with me. And Lori and I had them in our home as we celebrated our Easter meal and, reflected on the day. I had to take the lilies with me. I, in a sense, had to carry, they were like my personal journey, right? And then this morning, as I was getting ready to come here to talk to you, I grabbed them again and I put them in the car and they traveled with me. And here they are in this space. And in many ways, this Easter lily pivot, this new experience of the way in which I've managed this gift this year is exemplary of what we're all up to. We've all been kind of tossed into our own personal lifeboats. We can't simply hand over our spiritual lives to the institution these days, but we're all required to kind of hold on to our own floral arrangement, right? It's been our responsibility and your responsibility to nurture your own experience of faith during this year. You've had to make decisions on how that works. It has not been done for you on your behalf by organized religion. It's been your personal journey. And my sense is that you've probably grown in that, right? Had to think about that a little bit harder, had to, pack it with you wherever you go. Let it be with you in your house, in your office space at home, or wherever it is, right? We've all had to journey in a new way with the spirit of the Easter lily during this pandemic. And so it's sort of a metaphor for me today to hang on to it and know that I'm going to carry it back home with me after this is over, right? I'm responsible to nurture this thing. It's on me this year. What does that look like? So welcome, and let's get this ball rolling, shall we? 15 years ago, the Pew Research Center put out a report, and I remember when it came out, it was like they fired a shot across the bow of the Titanic, right? The religious institutional life of which I was a part. And we all have heard this data, but the data was loud and clear. And it was that Christianity as we have known it and its ascent in American life had pivoted as well. This is 15 years ago, and was showing significant signs it was on the decline. And you could feel it in the edges of congregational life. I could feel it. I was a church leader and continue to be one. I could sense that something was happening in that kind of the growth trajectory had shifted. And now it felt like there was this slow decline in the influence and the capacity of Christianity in general. And sure enough, mainline Protestantism, evangelical Protestants, Catholics, most of the kind of the traditional forms of faith in America were all on the decline. And Pew let us know that this was happening, right? That this was a trend line. And all of us were challenged. And I remember going to these meetings as clergy in our denominations, challenging ourselves to think about, how do we reverse this decline? How do we get people to re-engage in church life? And I'm telling you, we all spent a lot of time and energy trying to figure that out. What was interesting is that while we were in decline as an institution, while we were in decline as a way in which people self-identified their religious experience, there was one category that was growing. And that category continues to grow today. And that was a category of unaffiliated atheists, agnostics, and the box that you would check that would say, well, I am nothing in particular. The nuns, as they called it, the nun group, N-O-N-E, the nun group was growing. And it turns out that the most powerful religious movement in America today are people moving into the category of unaffiliated, of the nuns. That I wouldn't classify myself spiritually or religiously in any of the categories above. It's as if people were starting to break out from the boxes of categories that we have used for so long to identify who we are as faithful people. And frankly, the church, the organized religion, was fighting that trend by trying to get people to go back into the box, right? Will you please come back to the box? And we all tried to struggle with ways to make that happen. And I was a part of that struggle as well. So that was done 15 years ago. And we've seen, and this, the church that I serve has seen the decline since then in numbers and attendance, giving, the whole 9 yards. My guess is that 15 years ago, we started the pivot that has been amplified by this year of pandemic. We really did start to think, what is it that we need to do to still be a vibrant partner in the spiritual / religious life of the communities in which we serve, even as the landscape is changing. Not only collectively, but for you, your landscape was changing, right? My guess is you were not insulated from this larger trend that was inviting people to think about their spiritual lives, their engagement with the sacred or the holy, or however you would language that experience for yourself. We were all being invited to begin to think outside of the box. And Pew Research Center, just in the last year, kind of revisited all that data. And here's what they discovered as they began to revisit that data again. Now, after 15 years of this trend line, right? One of the most significant things was that mainline Protestants, like Lutherans, finally slipped into a minority group. While they had always been above 50% of the general population, for the first time, they slipped below 50%. So this trend line was continuing, and now we're a minority voice in the American experience. And so it was true for all of the major religious groups, slipping into a minority voice as a kind of, what would you call it? Like a traditional way of framing the religious experience. That was one trend line, that this is not relenting. So it's time to pivot, friend. That's one. Two, and this is fascinating, that most people who are still classifying in that box, and I'm sorry this is going on, but it's my last Sunday, so just, for a while, so just listen up. So most of the people in religious communities still continue to think that this is a temporary condition. Even though it's been going on for 15 years, when you ask people in religious institutions, what's going on, they often say, well, it's temporary, that this trend will turn around. And I think Pew finds that somewhat humorous, that why is it that we think it's going to turn around? I mean, it's not going to turn around. This is the way things are going. In addition, the group that were the nuns back 15 years ago, it continues to soar. That more and more and more people are continuing to find themselves in that category. Turns out that you just, when asked to put our experience of the sacred in the standard boxes in which they have been held for so long, you can't actually put that in a box anymore. I think there's something liberating about that. I think there's something exciting about that. I think there's something freeing about that. I think there's something like Easterish. I don't think that's a word. There's something Easter about that, right? There's something spring-like about that. There is something hope-filled in there. What is it? And did we stumble into some of those edges during this time of pandemic? These trend lines were brought home to Lori and I personally this last week. Lori was required to go check into the hospital for a procedure that she'd been putting off for some time because of the pandemic and not wanting to go in, but now was the time to go do it. And everything worked out fine. She's fine, not that major of a procedure, but one she wanted to get done. And she had to go into the surgery center for it, right? So she had to literally check into the hospital. And as she's checking into the hospital, there was a woman behind the counter who handed her all of her forms. And because she was going to be staying in the hospital for a bit, there might be the chance that she might need to be visited by a chaplain, right? Particularly if things go sour. So the woman asked her about her religious affiliation and then slid in front of her the categories of the boxes that she could check as a person of faith so that the right chaplain would show up in her room and be present for her if she needed some spiritual guidance along the way of this journey. We've all had this experience, I'm sure. Now, Lori was faced with it. She stared at the boxes, right? Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, probably. There's sort of mainline Protestant, evangelical Protestant. What was the box that she was going to check in this moment that would identify her as a religious person? And she couldn't bring herself to check a box. And then even more importantly, she stared across the counter. The person asking her to self-identify was a Black woman. And Lori knows the kind of abhorrent history of Christianity with people of color throughout our time on this continent, right? And so she's like stuck in this moment of saying, I don't know how to identify myself. In the end, she made up her own classification. In the end, she didn't check a box, or maybe she did, I don't remember, but it was a difficult challenge for her. And in the end, she wrote on her documentation going into Kaiser, I am a progressive eco-Christian. And I got a chuckle out of that. A progressive eco-Christian is not a bad classification, but you can feel that she was experiencing exactly what Pew is saying is happening in America, that her spirituality, her religious identity can no longer be classified in a box. And she doesn't want to be classified that way. Now, God knows who's going to show up in her room if she has trouble. I only know one eco-chaplain, and I'm pretty sure she's not on the call list at Kaiser. So she was probably just going to be stuck in there on her own. But you get it, right? You get it that all of us are asked to think critically about how would we give expression to our spiritual trajectory given this moment in time. So that's something I'm going to ask of you today. Whether you join us for the virtual coffee hour afterwards, or whether you can put it in the comments section, if you can think for a moment about if you were forced to not pick a box, even if you like the boxes, how would you self-describe? What would be the language you would use to articulate where you are at this moment in your own spiritual trajectory, how you carry the Easter lilies in this moment in time? And to commit yourself to kind of preempting the moment when you're asked to check a box and say, I think this is how I would self-identify. And what does that say about me? What's that say about the way in which sacred is moving in my life? That's the challenge that I'd like you to do today. I'm going to give you a moment to think about how you might do that by playing some music by Martin today. But before I do that, and I know, I got a couple minutes here. Before I do that, I think I want to just share with you what I think have been some of the pivots that have taken place during this pandemic that I've noticed, that I'm definitely going to be integrating into the way in which I come back and re-engage spiritual communities and possibly you in some other format. What are some of the things that I've noticed, and probably you've noticed as well? One, there is a more open assumption that we can be in spiritual community with a wider range of diverse expressions of that kind of spirituality that are beyond sort of normative denominational form. Was that a long sentence? I think that was a long sentence, which is what I do. I do that too much. But so people are not feeling like they have to package their religious experience and expression in sort of formulaic language that they have been bequeathed by their denominational historical settings or trajectories. That is no longer a requirement. That people are finding expressions all around the cultural milieu that holds us, right? And bringing them in about what's most important today, about issues of racial identity or gender or sexual orientation or relationship to nature or to people of other cultures or other religious traditions. People are gathering together a more eclectic way of engaging and expressing themselves spiritually. And frankly, that's okay. And to me, the question is, if that's okay, and that's one thing we're pivoting in towards, then what do institutions like church, which is basically just calling all the spiritual people in the community together, what should we be doing with that? In my sense, it's going to be much more conversational. We're pivoting to both having an open ear and mind and heart to the experience of others in a way that allows all of us to evolve together. That it's picking up on this trend line that Pew has been telling us about for over 15 years and saying, how are we thinking about our spiritual lives outside of kind of the formal constructs of box? And what would it look like when we do that together? I'll give you a couple examples. One, we used to have a program here in this church that I serve called Milestones for Kids. And the Milestones was a way of taking and putting together some of the key milestones along the faith journey out from our tradition that children would experience. And in this last year, I've taken the time with the graduate students at the GTU to reframe that whole program to think about more like spiritual milestones that just we all kind of go through. And to celebrate those and to help children find their way through those, that gives them greater choice and capacity along their own faith trajectory, rather than trying to get them to conform to the kind of the nomenclature and the language and the constructs that kind of traditional Lutheran theology might build for them and try to get them to fit their spirituality into. This is a different way of doing that. that's another trend line. I think that is a way we're pivoting. And I would expect that I'm going to bring that when I return to the community I serve, right? How do we do that more fully? The last thing I would say is I've noticed kind of the intimacy of Zoom circles have really allowed a kind of vulnerability and a willingness to be vulnerable about realizing that we don't have the answers, but that we're definitely committed to being in conversation about all the questions that we're facing collectively, and the interplay between the conversation around the questions and the challenges and our kind of inner spiritual conversation. That interplay has been very dynamic, and I think that's something that will continue as well. So I guess what I'm saying is the pandemic required us to do some pivoting, but we were doing a soft pivot already. And now I think we're committed to saying we can pivot individually and collectively. What might that look like going forward? All right. So today I want you to enjoy a piece of music to finish up with, Martin, and it's based on the piece of poetry that has been leveraged in so many ways called All Things Bright and Beautiful. And however you understand that piece of poetry, I just like to keep it that, right? It does say all things bright and beautiful, all creatures great and small, or something like that. The Lord God made them all, which, you know, I'm not sure I'm totally in on the theology behind that poetry, but I definitely like the idea of all things being bright and beautiful. That said, that poetry found its way into a piece of music. That poetry found its way into, I think, a TV series about some farm doctor. That poetry, once it drops into the cultural imagination, keeps morphing. And today, Martin plays a piece of music as an example of the way in which it's morphed into the musical world. And I think it's a model for what we're just talking about today, is that think as if even God or the sacred, it can't be kept in a box either, right? It works more like that piece of poetry. It drops into the human experience, and then from there, it just finds itself manifesting in all sorts of ways. So today, as you listen to this piece of music, let it inspire you to reimagine how you too might find your way out of the box and into a more creative expression of your spiritual life that you can kind of leverage and build on as you move forward. So enjoy this music by Martin today. Okay, hold on a minute. I realized I messed something up. I have to change something here. Getting rusty, even though I know what I'm doing,
by
but I don't know what I'm doing.
19th century Irish poet Cecil Francis Alexander. She intended for this to be a poem for children, but it has been enjoyed by people of all ages. These words were also the inspiration for the titles of a series of beloved books written by James Herriot about his veterinary practice in rural England. We know these words as the words to a hymn that we sing, and this is the way that we are accustomed to hearing it. And here it is in a very unusual arrangement that sets the tune to a calypso beat.
Well, thank you, Martin. That was lovely. And hopefully that gave you a little bit of time to think about the way in which you might frame your own kind of religious experience, right? How would you find language so that the poetry of the divine is articulated in your particular life expression in a way that might open up the box a little bit? That's what I would challenge you to think about. And then to bring that self with you as we begin to reemerge as church again, knowing the trend lines, right? Knowing where all this is going, and trying to reimagine what church might be together, or what community life might be together when we gather together to focus in on what is most spiritual to us. All right. So thanks for being a part of this week. We're going to shift to kind of a time of announcements. If you jumped onto this during the week, I would encourage you to put in the comments section any old time how you would self-identify, so people can go back and look and see all the different diverse ways in which people give language to that. Whether you're a progressive eco-Christian, whether like me, I might think more in terms of an open soul pilgrim, maybe, because I feel like I'm always kind of exploring, whatever language works for you. And to help us kind of explore that a little bit more, I'm going to invite Sam on board to join us and have a conversation with her about how she thinks about this as well. So Sam, welcome to the club.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. I got the weird earphones on today because
you added a headset in a matter of seconds there.
Yes, I lost my earbuds. I don't know where I put them, so I'm stuck with this for now. Great to see you this morning, Sam.
Good morning. It's good to see your face. I like that butterfly shirt. That's a good
Yeah,
shirt.
this is a whopper. I'll tell you my shirt story one day. It's long and complicated, but I have a shirt thing. It's a good story. So Sam, one of the things that I've challenged everybody to think about today, and I would love to hear from you, is if you had to, shift out of the kind of the standard box that we use to identify people religiously, which if you were in a box would be mainline Protestant, what would be the language? How would you do that?
I like how you say if you were in a box, as though somehow I don't like the box.
I kind of imagine that this wouldn't be a hard project for you.
All right, so a little bit of thought this morning. The editor has already got her hat on and is like, I don't know, I might need to take the sentence apart, but I think this is sort of what it boils down to.
Yeah.
Divine spark seeker in a very wet and muddy world.
Ooh, man. God, who's going to show up as your chaplain in the hospital? Say that one more time. That is so beautiful. I love the spark one. Say it again.
Divine spark seeker in a very wet and muddy world.
Wow.
And the question is, and this is getting out there, does the word divine need to be there?
Yeah.
Because maybe it doesn't. I think spark seeker in a wet and muddy world in and of itself might be all that's necessary.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think I'm struggling with the same thing, in that because I grew up in such a religious tradition, I'm always trying to put that energy into my language. But I'm with you. I'm uncertain as to whether it's needed. And I don't think I would lose anything if do you think you would lose anything if you just said spark seeker?
Yeah, that's why I crossed it out when I wrote it down, editor hat on. I was like, this could be simpler. And I went, oh my gosh, now that's illuminating, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. So I would just encourage people to be creative with this, because it does allow you to think in terms of, so what is my growing edge if in fact I reclassify myself outside the box? It was divine spark seeker, but even for you to think in terms of what would it look like if I'm just a spark seeker?
Yeah.
In a wet and muddy, that's the two terms used?
Wet and muddy world.
Oh my gosh. I wish I could pause all this excitement right now, because I got to I love when stuff like that makes me go, let that sink in. That's super good.
You guys, I would say take the time. Don't just think it. Take the time to like sit down and start writing some stuff down. You will be amazed what comes out of your hands.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I was asking people to do it in the comment section, but maybe Sam, I think it's right. Take some time with it. Maybe journal for 15 minutes on it, and then come back and put it in the comment section later. Because I do want to hear it. It is so rich, right?
There's just so much out there, and I don't know. I think every one of us has a little bit of son of man in every one of us, you know.
Mhm.
And I think it takes lots of different identities and lots of different facets in every one of us. I'd love to hear what really speaks to other people.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that one, Sam. It's awesome.
Of course.
All right. Well, I hate to move to such mundane things as announcement time, but that's what you're going to do for us right now. What, for those who are part of the OSLC community, what is coming up next week that they need to pay attention to?
So in this coming week, we've got beginning Monday, that can't be right, May 10th? May 10th?
12th. It's the
12th. Well,
no, Monday is the 12th, I think.
Monday is the 12th. The announcement says it's beginning in May. So beginning in May on the
Yes.
10th from 7 to 8 p.m., we have the From Daughters to Disciples group.
Ah, yes.
Which is going
Yes.
to be pretty fantastic. I'm actually really excited about this book too, come to think of it. So that's coming up. Get it on your calendar now because we all know things get busy when spring and summer hits. We've also got this Thursday at 11 a.m. We'll continue our adult forum. So we'll be moving on to wrapping up our fabulous book.
Yeah, Jesus Before God. Good.
So that's coming right up. And let's see here. So let me double check. We have Janet Qatari coming, which is very exciting.
Right. It is exciting. Janet was a part of our congregation for a long time, went to seminary. In my opinion, a brilliant mind and a good soul. So you put those two things together, I think you're going to be looking forward to some really great stuff this summer. So I'm excited about that.
There are hearts here that know Janet's name and they get very excited when they hear it. So
yeah,
I'm looking forward to getting to know Janet.
Cool.
And then it looks like we've got a new soul forum out, Dan. Is that the case?
Well, so yeah, it's a little bit tricky. It's a longer story than that, but yes, I am gonna, Soul Forum's just coming to a close with Raphael, and his last one was really good, I thought, sort of capturing how to bring the heart and the spirit to an economic framework that might be more just. So it was really wonderful. I listened to it last week. And then I'm going to try to start doing some interviews with people, just kind of an eclectic group of people to kind of help them do kind of what you just did. And that is, if they had to find some language to describe their own soul's landscape, how would they do that? And then from there, how do they think about what is our collective soul, or what is the soul of America, or the soul of the earth? Are we working towards something that's emerging? Or is there something that's drawing us into a new consciousness as a spiritual people? So I'm going to just have some of those conversations, start posting those up. But I got some technical mumbo jumbo I got to get through, or I got to deal with some stuff, but I'll get there.
It'll happen.
It'll happen.
And then, oh, you've got more to say. Go for it.
Well, so the only two things is there is a council meeting coming up on Thursday for council members. Remember that. And then the youth who ran the Easter bake-off thing, they're going to have you vote for the most amazing Easter baking submissions. So that's coming your way. So get ready for that. That's coming up around the corner.
And don't forget, April is Creation Care Month. So we've got an online worship service for Earth Day on the 18th of April. And you can register for that via the link in the email that went out this week.
Ah, fantastic. Yeah, thanks for reminding me of that. It's too bad we have to do that digitally. That's one of the wonderful outdoor celebrations I love to be a part of. And now we're doing it online again, but that's the way it is. All right. All right, everybody. Well, thanks for being a part of today. We're going to shift out of this and encourage you to do what Sam had suggested, and that is maybe not respond right away to your identity, but maybe linger on it for a bit and then just come back and share it with all of us. That would be really super awesome. So thanks for being a part of the journey. I'll see you when I get back in August. Going to be a long haul.
You got this.
God only knows what I'm going to be like on the other end of this sabbatical. Yeah. All right. See y'all.